Friends, the story I'm about to share with you is a chilling journey into a family's hidden past, son's desperate search for his father, and the dark secrets that lay buried for decades. It all began in late August of 1996. The narrator, just 19 years old, came home after a night of partying to a strangely silent house. He found his mother at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in front of her, an unusual sight for the daytime. A sense of dread washed over him, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. His mother's words confirmed his fears, but not in the way he expected. His father was gone, not dead, just gone. He had packed a suitcase, gotten in his car, and driven off without a word, without a note, leaving behind a void of unanswered questions. For the first few months, a heavy silence hung over the family. Relatives would call and visit, but the conversations were carefully curated, focusing on their well-being, never daring to touch the raw nerve of why their father had left. The narrator's mother would either break down in tears or erupt in anger whenever he tried to bring it up, declaring his father dead to me. This wall of silence only fueled the narrator's burning curiosity. He suspected his mother was hiding something, and he was determined to find out what. His first lead was his father's only close friend, Carl. Carl was as shocked as anyone to hear of his friend's disappearance. He had no idea why he would leave, but he did offer a few potential locations where he might have gone. His old job in Portland, his hometown of Lincoln City, or a small remote town in northern Canada called Wrigley. After ruling out the first two possibilities, the narrator set his sights on Wrigley. Carl mentioned that his father had spent a summer there in his college years, and had often reminisced about it. It was a long shot, a grueling 30-hour drive into the Canadian wilderness, but it was the only lead he had. He arrived in Wrigley in the summer of 1998. The town was the very definition of small, with a population of around 100. One gas station and one medical clinic. At the gas station, he met a man named Winston, who would prove to be an invaluable ally. The narrator showed Winston a recent photo of his father, which he didn't recognize. But then, he showed him an older picture, a relic from his father's college days. In it, a younger version of his father stood next to a young woman, both in hiking gear, pointing at a large rock. Winston recognized the landmark as Hunter's Rock, a place shrouded in local legend. He also recognized the young woman. With about 80% certainty, he identified her as a girl who had gone missing near Great Bear Lake back in the early 1970s. To be sure, he advised the narrator to visit the local government office, located in the medical clinic. The next day, the narrator met with Chief Irwin of the Pagbky First Nation. The chief's warm and welcoming demeanor quickly turned cold when he saw the old photograph. He led the narrator into his office and dropped a bombshell. The girl in the picture was Susan Culver, a university student who had disappeared in the summer of 1973, and his father, the narrator's father, had been a suspect in her disappearance, questioned by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, not once, but twice. The news was shocking, but it was also a breakthrough. For the first time in 18 months, the narrator had something solid to go on. It seemed plausible that his father, plagued by the memory of a lost love and a wrongful accusation, had made a pilgrimage back to Wrigley to seek answers. But there was another piece to the puzzle. His mother's intense anger and secrecy. Had she known about Susan? Chief Irwin explained that Susan's remains were never found, and no one was ever charged. Her last known location was in the unforgiving wilderness near Great Bear Lake, in an area known as the Sawtooth Lands. The narrator was so close to understanding, but the Sawtooth Lands were a 200-mile drive and a 30-mile hike away, a journey he simply couldn't afford. The thought of turning back now, so close to the truth, was unbearable. He made two difficult phone calls, one to his manager to beg for more time off, and another to his mother to plead for money. His manager was understanding, but his mother was furious. It was a tearful, intense argument, but she finally relented. Just when he thought his journey had hit another roadblock, Winston offered to drive him to Deline, the town near Great Bear Lake, for just the cost of gas. Before they left, Winston posed a haunting question that would stick with the narrator for the rest of his life. If your dad's out looking for the girl and you're out looking for him, who's going to end up looking for you? In Deline, they went straight to the RCMP office. The young Constable Jacobs was helpful, but passed him on to an older, more experienced Mountie named Mackenzie. Mackenzie remembered the case. He had been a junior constable at the time. He recalled the narrator's father stumbling into town, reporting Susan missing, and then implicating himself during questioning. He couldn't share the official files, but the promise of a Freedom of Information request gave the narrator a glimmer of hope. That night, back in Wrigley, sleeping in his car, the narrator was awoken by a knock on his window. It was Mackenzie. He got into the car and handed him a cassette tape. It was the recording of his father's first interview with the RCMP. On the tape, his father recounted the night Susan disappeared. They were camping when she went out to use the restroom. He heard her scream. He rushed out and saw them. He was frantic, almost unhinged, telling the Mounties they should know who they were. He was convinced Susan was dead, that they had killed her. It was no wonder they had suspected him. Mackenzie explained that the second interview was useless. His father had clammed up once he realized he was a suspect. He was released due to lack of evidence, and the search for Susan was eventually called off. But Mackenzie shared one more strange detail. A search dog had also vanished without a trace during the search. Mackenzie's theory was that his father and Susan had stumbled upon something illicit, like a drug operation, but there was no proof. Driving back home, the narrator was filled with a mix of sadness and fear. He felt closer to understanding his father, yet more distant than ever. 2 years have passed since that trip to Wrigley. The narrator, now more experienced in solo hiking, is planning to return to Deline. He knows where to look now, and he's ready to face whatever he might find in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Satu lands. He promised to share what he finds, leaving us with a chilling cliffhanger. If he doesn't post again, it will mean he either found his father or something else found him. That was a chilling journey into a family's dark past. Now, this next story shifts from the vast Canadian wilderness to a place we've all been. A lonely gas station late at night. Have you ever been driving, the world around you a blur of darkness and asphalt, and pulled into a place that felt just a little too quiet? The story I'm about to share is a stark reminder to trust that gut feeling. It was a November night, around 1:30 in the morning, when the narrator pulled into a desolate 2-pump gas station. Exhausted from a long drive, he didn't notice anything amiss at first. He filled his tank, his eyes glued to the numbers on the pump, and then walked over to the kiosk to pay. That's when the silence became unsettling. There was no one at the counter. He waited, assuming the employee was on a quick break. But as the minutes ticked by, a sense of unease began to creep in. He noticed the car at the pump in front of him was also empty. The driver was nowhere to be seen. A momentary chill ran down his spine. Had he stumbled upon a robbery in progress? He hesitated, unsure of what to do. He checked the car in front of him, a BMW, not a Honda, which offered a small, albeit a logical sense of reassurance. He knocked on the glass of the kiosk, once, then twice, then a third time. Nothing. Something was definitely wrong. He tried the door to the convenience store, and to his surprise, it swung open. He called out, "Hello?" But his voice was met with an unnerving silence. Fearing a medical emergency, he jumped the counter and checked the back room's a bathroom, storage room, a small office all empty. The entire gas station was deserted. He pulled out his phone, ready to dial 911, but still not entirely sure what to report. He called out, "Hello?" One more time, louder this time, his voice echoing in the empty space. When there was no response, he called the police. The dispatcher initially sounded skeptical, as if he were just an impatient customer. But as he explained the situation, her tone shifted. She asked if it looked like a robbery had occurred. He didn't know how to answer. He had looked everywhere, or so he thought. As he was on the phone with the dispatcher, walking back from checking the highway for any signs of life, he passed the gas station's dumpster. A thought, prompted by the dispatcher's question, popped into his head. He wanted to be able to tell her, definitively, that there was no one there. He lifted the lid. The sight that greeted him was the stuff of nightmares. He only caught a glimpse before he dropped the lid and stumbled back. But it was enough. 2 bodies, contorted and stained with dark patches, were crammed inside. One of them was wearing a gas station uniform. Oh, Jesus, oh my God, he stammered into the phone, his voice trembling with shock. They're in the dumpster. The police arrived within minutes. By then, He had managed to stumble to the side of the highway and vomit, his body racked with a mixture of horror and revulsion. He paced back and forth, trying to calm his shaking hands, until he saw the flashing lights of a patrol car approaching. After a brief conversation with an officer, he was free to go. Later, he searched online for news about the incident. He found articles about a member of the public himself finding 2 bodies at a gas station. But there was no explanation, no mention of how or why they had been killed. The mystery of that night has haunted him ever since. He's more cautious now when he drives at night, always keeping a close eye on his fuel gauge, trying to avoid those nocturnal pit stops. And if a gas station looks just a little too quiet, he doesn't take any chances. He just keeps on driving. Finding 2 bodies in a dumpster is a true nightmare scenario. But what happens when the horror isn't a random act of violence, but something that festers within a community itself? This next story takes us to a small town in Arkansas. A town that was rocked by a crime so heinous, it shattered their sense of peace and security. It all started one summer when a 9th-grade girl was brutally attacked on her way home from school. The assault was so violent that she required extensive surgery to repair the damage. The doctor who operated on her, a man accustomed to dealing with trauma, broke down in tears during the press conference, a testament to the horrific nature of the crime. The town was gripped by fear and paranoia. Everyone was a suspect. State police took over the investigation, and local officers went door to door, appealing for information. In a town where a speeding ticket was usually the biggest news, this brutal attack was a seismic shock. The community prayed for the attacker to be caught, and caught quickly. Then, out of the blue, the unthinkable happened. A local pastor walked into his 17-year-old son's bedroom and shot him point-blank in the head. It was the boy's mother, the pastor's wife, who called the sheriff. When the deputies arrived, the pastor didn't resist. He calmly allowed them to cuff him and led them to his cruiser. At the station, he confessed to everything. He told them he and his son had had a disagreement. He had gone downstairs, retrieved a pistol from his gun safe, walked back upstairs, and shot him. He provided every detail, the type of gun, the caliber of the bullet, everything except the reason. The deputies pressed him over and over about the nature of the disagreement, but the pastor remained silent on that one crucial point. He simply repeated that he had done it and asked to be taken to jail. Officially, the motive for the murder remains a mystery. But in the small, tight-knit community of this Arkansas town, everyone knows why the pastor killed his son. They believe the pastor's son was the one who had attacked the 9th-grade girl. The pastor, in their eyes, had delivered his own form of justice. The only question that remains is how the pastor found out. There are many theories, some more plausible than others, but it's a question that will likely never be answered. And for many in that town, it doesn't matter. Their minds, the pastor did the right thing. He put down a monster. But the story leaves us with a chilling thought. What kind of darkness can fester in the heart of a community? And what lengths will people go to when they believe they are serving a higher purpose? The pastor's story is a chilling example of what people will do when they believe they read delivering justice. But this next case is even more baffling, a mystery that spans decades and is filled with shocking confessions and recanted tales. Let's talk about the disappearance of little Marina Childress, a 4-year-old girl who vanished from her front yard in Union City, Tennessee. On April 16, 1987, Marina was playing outside while her mother, Pamela Bailey, was inside washing dishes, keeping a watchful eye on her through the kitchen window. Pamela looked down for just a moment, and in that brief instant, she heard the screech of tires. She looked up to see a red car with Kentucky license plates speeding away. A wave of panic washed over her as she rushed outside to find her daughter gone. She immediately contacted the police, her mind racing back to an incident that had occurred just hours earlier. At a nearby gas station, a man in a red car with the same Kentucky plates had approached Marina. When Pamela confronted him, he quickly excused himself and drove away. The police tracked the man down, but he had an alibi and consented to a search of his home. He was ruled out as a suspect. Marina's stepfather and biological father were also cleared. The investigation stalled, and for 6 long weeks, there were no leads. Then, in a shocking turn of events, Pamela confessed. During a taped interview with a private investigator hired by her family, she claimed that she had accidentally killed Marina in a fit of anger. She said she had struck her daughter, who then fell and hit her head on a table. In a panic, she hid Marina's body in the trunk of her car and, with the help of a family friend, P.L. Summers, dumped her body in the Obion River. The police immediately launched a search of the river, but they found nothing. When they questioned Pamela again, she recanted her confession. She claimed she had been coerced by the private investigator, who had threatened her with the electric chair. She also alleged that she had been heavily medicated at the time, having just been released from a psychiatric hospital. Then she made another startling accusation. P.L. Summers, the man she had implicated in her confession, was not her friend, but her lifelong abuser. And he was the one who had abducted and murdered Marina. Then police investigated Summers, who vehemently denied the accusations. He had a solid alibi for the day of Marina's disappearance and was ruled out as a suspect. However, just months later, Summers was arrested for molesting a 9-year-old boy, lending a chilling credence to Pamela's claims of abuse. But still, there was no solid evidence to connect him to Marina's disappearance. The case went cold. Pamela moved to Mayfield, Kentucky, and tried to start a new life. She had a son, Casey, and for 12 years they lived in peace. Then, on April 22, 2002, just days after the 15th anniversary of Marina's disappearance, Pamela told Casey she had a surprise for him. She blindfolded him, drove him to a cemetery, and led him to a child-sized gravestone. When he removed the blindfold, she attacked him with a knife, stabbing him in the neck and shoulder. Casey managed to escape and survived. Pamela was arrested and charged with attempted murder. She claimed to have no memory of the event and eventually pleaded no contest to second-degree assault. She served a little over 6 years in prison. The police reopened Marina's case, but they were no closer to finding answers. The narrator of the video presents a chilling theory. What if Marina was never murdered at all? What if she was sold? He points to the infamous case of Georgia Tan, a woman who ran a black market adoption ring in Tennessee from the 1920s to the 1950s, selling thousands of children. He suggests that Pamela may have been in cahoots with the man in the red car, a decoy in a larger human trafficking network. Perhaps Pamela, unable to cope with the stigma of giving up her child for adoption, arranged for her to be abducted. Perhaps the guilt of what she had done drove her to the brink of madness, leading to the attack on her son years later. The story of Marina Childress is a heartbreaking and deeply disturbing mystery. Was she the victim of a tragic accident, a violent abduction, or something even more sinister? We may never know the truth. But her story serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. The mystery of what truly happened to Marina Childress is haunting. Now, we're going to travel across the Atlantic to another small town, this one in Estonia, where an entire community seemed to fall under a dark spell, a psychic earthquake of violence and madness. The narrator, Marco, paints a vivid picture of a town called Kurdla, a place that, in the late 1980s, became the epicenter of a series of bizarre and violent events that defy easy explanation. Kurdla is a coastal town where the main industries are fishing, tourism, and a more unusual trade known as wrecking, salvaging valuable items from sunken ships. This practice created a deep rift in the community. The fishermen, steeped in tradition and superstition, believed that disturbing the final resting places of drowned sailors would bring bad luck. The wreckers, on the other hand, saw it as a lucrative business, especially during the oppressive communist era, when the government encouraged the dismissal of such silly superstitions. This tension, combined with the simmering resentment towards the Russian presence in Estonia, created a volatile atmosphere. The town was a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. And in September of 1989, that spark ignited. It all began with a 16-year-old Russian cocktail waitress named Dasha, quiet, popular, and a good student. She was the last person anyone would suspect of violence. But one Saturday evening, she walked into the Russian cafe where she worked, flooded the kitchen with gas, and ignited it. The explosion ripped through the restaurant, injuring 14 people and killing 5, including Dasha herself. The authorities were quick to blame anti-Russian sentiment, but the fact that the perpetrator was a young Russian girl left everyone stunned. What could have driven her to such a horrific act? Just 2 days later, another tragedy struck. A Russian fishing boat worker, blackout drunk at 7:30 in the morning, deliberately swerved his car into a line of schoolchildren waiting for the bus. He killed 4 of them. When he was dragged from his car, he was laughing. As the police took him away, he was counting, in Russian, the number of dead children. The town was in a state of shock. It felt like they were under attack from some invisible, malevolent force. They held a vigil for the dead children, a moment of collective grief and solidarity. But the horror was not over. During the vigil, people noticed that one family was absent. A small group went to check on them and made a gruesome discovery. An 11-year-old boy had convinced his 7-year-old sister to help him murder their parents in their sleep. They had crept into their parents' bedroom with kitchen knives and slit their throats. The town descended into a state of collective madness. The wreckers, once so dismissive of superstition, began throwing their salvaged treasures back into the sea, hoping to appease the angry spirits of the dead sailors. The fishermen left offerings in the woods for the witches of Huma, the island where Kurdla is located, believing they were responsible for the string of tragedies. The narrator calls it a psychic earthquake, a sudden, violent release of all the pent-up tension and fear that had been building in the town for years. He doesn't believe in witches or curses, but he acknowledges that the power of belief can drive people to do strange and terrible things. The wave of violence eventually subsided, leaving a scarred and bewildered community in its wake. The story of Kurdla is a chilling reminder of how easily the veneer of civilization can be stripped away, revealing the primal fears and dark impulses that lie dormant within us all. It's a story about the destructive power of hatred, paranoia, the terrifying consequences of a community's collective descent into madness.
That tale of collective madness in Kurdla is truly terrifying. But sometimes, the horror isn't spread across the whole town. It's focused, personal, and happens in the most mundane of places. This next story, from a young woman named Laura, takes place in a petrol station in the north of England. She was working the morning shift when a man walked in, who immediately caught her attention. He was the spitting image of Mark Bolan, the glam rock icon from the 1970s, but a darker, more sinister version. He had the same dark, curly hair and tired-looking eyes, but his features were sharp and gaunt, like a skeleton covered in a thin layer of paper. He was dressed in vintage clothes that were so worn and dirty they just made him look creepy. He bought a pint of milk and paid for his fuel, and then, instead of leaving, he leaned on the counter and said, "You're a pretty young lady, aren't you?" The compliment was delivered in a greasy, creepy tone that made Laura's skin crawl. She tried to politely brush him off, but he was persistent. He told her he did not often get to talk to a girl as pretty as her, and he wanted to make the most of it. Laura tried to explain that she had work to do, but he just waved her concerns away, telling her he would deal with her boss if he complained. Then he said something that sent a shiver down her spine. "I wish I was as pretty as you." The way he said it, with a slimy, leering tone, was a new level of cringe. She told him his comments were inappropriate, but he just laughed. "Don't you like being pretty?" he asked. The conversation took a darker turn. He told her she'd be depressed when she got older and lost her looks, that she'd be a pathetic, undesirable waste of oxygen. He was clearly unhinged. Laura told him to leave, but he refused. He was a customer, he said, and he wasn't going anywhere. She pulled out her phone, threatening to call the police. That's when he snapped. His voice dropped to a low, guttural growl. "If you don't like being pretty, I can make you not so pretty," he said. The threat was clear and terrifying. He told her he could come over the counter and smash her face in until she didn't look like a person anymore. He said her friends and family wouldn't recognize her. As she was on the phone with the police, he continued his horrific tirade, telling her he'd love to cut her face off and wear it. The police arrived within minutes. One of the officers instantly recognized the man. His name was Charles, or Chaz, and he had a history of harassing lone women. They were already building a case against him, and this incident was the final nail in his coffin. Laura never saw Chaz again. She doesn't know what happened to him, but she's grateful she never had to face him again. Her story is a stark reminder of the predators who walk among us and the importance of trusting your instincts when you feel like something is wrong. It's a terrifying encounter that could have ended so much worse. And it's a story that will stay with you long after you've heard it.
Laura's encounter with that predator was absolutely terrifying. For this final story, we're heading back to another one of those isolated late-night gas stations, this time in rural Virginia. But in this case, the weird customer was someone the owner knew and feared, a whole lot more than any random creep. This story, friends, is about a night when the silence of a rural outpost was shattered by a ghost from the past. And it serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that someone else already knows. Our narrator used to work the graveyard shift at a place called the North Star Mart, a lonely island of fluorescent light in an ocean of dark Virginia fields. His boss, a tough-as-nails guy named Judge, lived right next door and was the best boss he'd ever had. But Judge had one single golden rule which he laid down on the narrator's first night. "This place is quiet," he'd said. "But if anyone, and I mean anyone, shows up late at night acting weird in any way, I don't care what time it is, you call me. Don't play hero, you just call." For 9 months, the nights were peaceful. The only time the narrator ever had to use the rule was for a local woman named Rhonda, who would sometimes get drunk and scream at the moon out by the pumps. When he'd called, Judge just chuckled and told him not to worry about her. That was Jude's baseline for weird, something to be laughed off. That's a crucial detail, because what happened next was no laughing matter. Then came the last night the narrator ever worked there. It was around 2:30 a.m., and he was in the back office, half watching the security monitors. He saw a lone figure walking up the long driveway from the highway, emerging from the pitch-black darkness. The man looked completely unremarkably, middle-aged, rural dad type in a baseball cap and jeans. But instead of coming inside, he stopped dead in front of the glass doors, right in the center of the camera's view. He just stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. Then, very slowly, his head started to turn. It was a stiff, deliberate movement, like a machine. His neck craned until his face was angled perfectly, staring directly into the lens of the security camera. In that silent, isolated office, it felt like the man's eyes were boring through the lens, through the monitor, and directly into the narrator. He knew he was being watched. His heart started hammering. This wasn't Rhonda. This was something else entirely. His hand was shaking as he grabbed the phone and dialed Jude's number. Judge picked up, his voice thick with sleep. "Yeah, Judge, it's me," the narrator whispered, his eyes still glued to the unmoving face on the screen. "There's a guy out here. He's just ... He's acting weird." "All right, describe him to me," Judge sighed. "He's just standing outside, staring at the camera. He's maybe 50, wearing a baseball cap," and never finished the sentence. The instant he described the man, the line went dead. It wasn't a disconnect. Judge had slammed the phone down. The narrator stared at the receiver, a new wave of fear washing over him. Why would Judge hang up? He looked back at the monitor. The man was gone. The space in front of the door was empty. It was as if he had just vanished. But then, on the monitor showing the driveway, he saw a new figure. It was Judge, and he was running from his house in nothing but his boxer shorts and an undershirt, his bare feet slapping against the asphalt. Cradled in his arms, held at the ready, was his shotgun. The narrator's blood ran cold. This wasn't the calm, collected Judge who laughed about local drunks. This was a man in a primal state of terror. The front door of the store burst open, and Judge stormed in, the shotgun leading the way, his eyes wild. "Where is he?" Judge growled, his voice a low, ragged rasp. "I don't know. He was right there, and then he was just gone," the narrator stammered. Judge ran past him into the back office and immediately went to the security footage. He rewound it, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. He froze the frame on the man's face, zooming in. The narrator watched as every last drop of color drained from Jude's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. A ghost he knew. A ghost he was utterly terrified of. Judge sent the narrator home right then and there, saying he'd call the cops and handle it. The next afternoon, Judge called. His voice was strained and tired. "Listen," he said, "I'd understand if you don't want to come back to work after last night." This was his chance. "Judge, you have to tell me who that was," the narrator pleaded. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Judge finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Son," he said, "it's better that you don't know. It's safer that you don't know." The narrator thanked him for the job and hung up. He never went back. He understood that Jude's silence wasn't an insult. It was a final, desperate act of protection. He was trying to keep him safe from something so dangerous that the toughest man he'd ever known was willing to face it barefoot with a shotgun. And if that man scared Judge, the narrator knew, deep in his bones, that he never wanted to find out why. He didn't stand a chance against a ghost who could make a man like Judge run for his gun.